We're looking to get the total number of apprenticeships, new apprenticeships, up to 1 million. We're recreating that pipeline to ensure that, particularly as we onshore industrial jobs and new industries, that those industries have the workforce they need to be competitive globally.
Right. Very important.
White House is trying to restore America as a manufacturing powerhouse, but to do that, they need trained workers. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says the U.S. could be short almost 500,000 skilled tradesmen over the next decade if nothing is done to reverse it. Okay, so I'm really interested in the apprenticeship thing. And Andrew, I wonder if this is something you can speak to. I imagine in your line of work, when you're talking about, you know, folks who are doing, chefs, folks doing the food preparation, people running the stores, there's got to be a heavy level of apprenticeship there, right? And that's, I think, too often been viewed as a second-class way to get training, and I think that's actually part of the problem we face right now. Yeah,
100%, and especially in the culinary world, people ask me all the time, should I send my kid to culinary school? Should I go to this university? And by the way, those culinary schools went from like $5,000 or $10,000 a year to like $75,000 a year. They got sucked up into that higher education calculus. But the apprenticeship is the way that in the old school people got their chops in the restaurant industry. It was, did you go to this apprenticeship or that apprenticeship? But then we also see that, and specifically in the restaurant industry, in HVAC, plumbing, electrical, restaurant refrigeration repair, right? Those are the things now that I'm paying 10 or 20, you know, or 200x more because the bodies aren't there to actually do the work. And in Orange County, I'm a Huntington Beach City Councilman as well, so I see the kind of economic relationship that we as a city have with Southern California, healthcare being one of our largest contributors to a lot of that tax revenue in Orange County, and they're short the tech workers that they need within the hospitals and the medical areas to be able to continue to stimulate that growth. So it's all of these moving parts in one economy that go from a small granular level all the way up to the biggest contributors of revenue in a place like Southern California.
You know, you talk about like the HVAC repair, refrigeration repair, and that sort of thing. Taylor, there's a ton of Gen Z, this is a Harris poll that came out, ton of Gen Z actually love the idea of working in roles like that, like traditionally blue-collar roles, but they're not as interested in working in a factory environment. Yeah. So we're kind of having this conversation about blue-collar, manufacturing, factories. For this younger generation, there's an openness to it, but they don't want that factory environment. They want more of that skilled trades environment.
Because they probably don't view factories as safe, right? Which I'm actually okay for, because if I think the way advanced manufacturing, we've talked about this. When America went from manufacturing to a service economy, China went from manufacturing to advanced manufacturing. They just did it better and faster and cheaper. If we're thinking of doing some of that, we're going to have robots in our manufacturing plants, right? So let's take those workers, Brian, that you talked about, and do more advanced skills. Not advanced sitting on a factory, but the advanced skill. Then you get that human-to-human interaction when you're talking about the HVACs and the plumbing and all of that stuff. I think it's also up to us to change the narrative about, instead of talking down about the trades, viewing it as a wonderful alternative as opposed to college. My worries, I said yesterday, was, and you corrected me, Brian, but the wage gains that I get now from avoiding college, what do I look like 10 years from now from the person who went to college and then makes 6 figures more than I do, right? And so trying to close that gap and the immediate gratification of a paycheck versus the investment in the future. And you rightfully pointed out there's other ways to invest in your future that are not college, and I hear you. But for me, this comes back to, you know, with the tariff stuff, I don't need to come and make sneakers in Ohio. I want to do advanced super skill stuff. A girlfriend of mine was in the hospital for a horrible disease that almost killed her. She came out of that and said, I need a new career. She's a radio tech now, right? Where she operates equipment to do x-rays and machinery and, you know, CAT scans and something that's near and dear to her heart. She had to go back to school for a little bit of that. That's more of that advanced trade that I think we're thinking about. Let
me throw this data out there, Dagen, for you. 6.2 million job openings in 2024, 72% were in occupations with labor shortages in fields that don't require a bachelor's or associate's degree. In other words, there are a ton of job openings in America. that don't require you to go to college and that are in more of a technical or trade area, but they go unfilled because nobody touts this stuff. And I think that's one of the problems politically. People tout like free tuition for everyone, go to college, get on the conveyor belt. They don't want to talk about these kind of jobs.
It's hard to unlearn the greatest lie sold to American kids and their parents over decades, starting in the early 80s, is that you have to get a college degree and you have to pay a lot of money for it. Like, the more expensive it is, the better it is. And it takes a long time to break that cycle. And it requires companies that hire it requires companies to break that. But it starts at the high school level.
Yeah.
Guidance counselors, who had a garbage guidance counselor? You have to send these kids, tell them about all the opportunities that are out there, and stop acting like the only thing that you have to do when you graduate is just go off to college. I can't think of one. I have one friend whose son went to flight schoal. Rather than joining the Air Force or going to the Naval Academy, he already had his private pilot's license when he was a teenager, and he went to flight school. And then you start and you're trained on jets. You start flying small jets, and then you move up. Right. But that was his destiny. But I can't think of one other friend who has done anything, their kids are doing anything different. They're all like in sororities or fraternities and paying through them. Their parents are paying through the nose for college.
Well, and just real quickly, you've made the point, I think it's a great one. The most valuable thing you learned in college was critical thinking. It wasn't the particular discipline. And we've got to break the narrative that you can only do that in college.
Absolutely, and I'd like to see it done better at the high school level too. That was actually where I first learned how to write, put an essay together, structure a thought, and that's why I brought that point up earlier in the conversation, which is we still have a problem at the lower levels that we need to fix, and then you'll set kids up in a better way to go into these trades as well. After everything that I've seen happening on these campuses, and I've seen how costly everything is, there's so many, times change and life changes, and we've got to be able to change that thinking, Dagen. I know it's hard. I do know it's hard. In my house, you had to be a doctor or a lawyer. So
Granted, I had an art history degree, but Wake Forest was cheap as anything back in the day. But when I went to interview for jobs here in New York City, I had to take typing tests. That is all that they cared about, was how fast I could type. Wow. And I'm talking about at the Museum of Modern Art. Wow. Like, they wanted you to take a typing test. In the magazines, a typing test. I'm like, but I have a college degree in this. They're like, they don't care. Can you type?
You should see the smoke coming off Dagen's computer when he types. It's unbelievable.
Needless to say, the one job I took, which was a financial journalist, they didn't care how fast I typed.